Stories told of some monks in a monastery who, in addition to taking vows of poverty and celibacy, decided they would take a vow of silence. Now, it was a new experience, so it was decided that once a year, one of these men would get up and say something each year for 3 years. So, after a year, the first brother was given the opportunity to speak and say something, and everyone was interested in what he was going to say. And so he stood up and said, "I think that the oatmeal served at breakfast is far too runny," and sat down. So another year passed. The second brother had his opportunity to speak, and he got up and he said, "Well, I think the oatmeal is far too lumpy." And he sat down. Third year, the third brother got up to speak. He said, "I'm really tired of all this arguing about the oatmeal." Now, this morning we're changing directions. We finished the book of Ephesians, and we are going to enter into a new subject that I have spoken on about as much as the oatmeal story that I just told. In fact, I'll be here in November. First Sunday in November is my first Sunday as the interim pastor here. So it's been 2 years, almost 2 years. And I'm pretty sure, I know I've never preached a message on this in 2 years I've been here. And so this ought to be interesting. You haven't heard this before, at least from me. It's the subject of giving. And more particularly, it's a subject of grace giving. And I would say, too, I have not spoke on this because I haven't had anything to speak on. In other words, the Bible has a lot to say. It doesn't ignore this subject of giving. It speaks a lot about money, speaks a lot about our view of it. Let me give you some examples. I just heard this week. I listened to some messages on giving, and I read some messages on giving, and I already had messages on giving, and so I was working on this throughout the week, but I had not considered this. One man that I have a lot of confidence in this area, he reminded us that 16 of 38 parables of Jesus deals with money. Goes on to say, more is spoken in the New Testament about money than heaven and hell combined. There are 5 times more things said about money than prayer. And while there are some 500 plus verses on prayer and faith, there are over 2,000 verses dealing with money and possessions. Therefore, preachers have ample material to teach on giving. Maybe that's why some churches, that's all they hear about, is how much you're going to give and how you need to give. And this becomes a hobby horse and a theme for a lot of preachers who preach on this subject. But I do feel a need to address this subject. First of all, because so the new pastor won't have to. We'd like for the new pastor to come in here and deal with other issues and just get excited and get started, not have to preach on giving right off the bat. I mean, let's give him a break. And since I have no vested interest in this subject, I can preach it and have a little more freedom to do so, because it's not like I'm asking you to raise my pay or anything like that. And so I'm not really preaching this message so you'll do more for me. I'm preaching this message for you, actually. Then also I thought another reason to do that is during our COVID year, which we had a lot of people gone for a while, we didn't even have people here at the church. Our previous giving in our budget dropped down significantly through that time. And we're entering into this year and wondering how this year's going, because we've had the drought and we've had other issues going on that have probably impacted how people's budgets are. But the wonderful thing is God has blessed this church with some wonderful gifts, and our treasury is very healthy. I listened to and talked to a number of pastors, even within the fellowship, who, and I've heard of other churches that are just near to close because they have no money. I mean, COVID just really made it hard. They didn't have anything extra, and when COVID hit, they had even less. That's not been true here. We've been blessed to have a ample supply in our treasury, and that's a blessing. But also, new believers need to understand God's view on this subject. Old believers need to be reminded of its importance in our worship. And I think there are two things you need to know as I begin. Number one, I do not intend to manipulate you this morning with guilt, duty, shame, or legalism to get you to give. That's not my purpose. And I believe giving ought to be motivated by love, motivated as a free will type offering. And so I don't intend to try to twist your arm or tell you, I don't want you to leave here and say, man, oh man, Pastor just really made me feel horrible about how I give. I mean, I want you to think about it. I want the Holy Spirit to guide you and direct you in your giving. But I will say some things in this message probably you've never heard before. Or if you have, you haven't heard from many preachers before, which might be interesting for you. You can agree with me during this message or not, that's fine. But I'll start out by saying, God doesn't need your money, okay? Probably haven't heard that for a while. God really doesn't need your money. He already owns everything. He is pretty self-sufficient. He really doesn't need what we have. But he does desire a relationship with us. Because of his character of love and grace, he wants to work in our lives for our benefit. And giving is one of those ways where he can bless and encourage us along the way. And we have lots of scriptures that, as I mentioned, that talk about that and talk about the need. So, realizing that God doesn't need your money, that he does already own everything, then that really, for you and I, that makes us stewards of all that he has entrusted to us. Therefore, we are responsible for what we have. And you will give an account for your usage when you stand before God at the judgment seat of Christ to receive rewards. You'll be accountable at that time for how you've done that. I think it's always kind of interesting to me when I hear things before I preach a message that just kind of solidify my thoughts about this. I was telling him in our prayer time today, I got up and I listened to two messages this morning, one by David Jeremiah and one by Robert Jeffries. Guess what they were speaking on? Money. They were talking about giving. I thought, oh, wow, that's my subject today. This will be fun. And I listened to them, and they taught me a few things just in a very short time that I had not really considered. David Jeremiah talked about how people are the addiction of money. You know, it's possible to be addicted, and we'll talk about that in just a moment to that. And Robert Jeffries was talking about why people worship money. And I thought, wow, okay, that's two already going down the direction I want to go. So let's make some observations about money, first of all. We haven't gotten to our text. I'll tell you when we get to our text. But let's make some observations. First of all, the Bible says we are not to love money. In 1 Timothy 6, verse 10, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. He doesn't say that money is bad. He just says, be careful not to love it. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1 and 2, know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money. David Jeremiah picked out that addicted to money. I thought, wow, okay, I never really saw lovers of money there as being an addiction, but I guess that would qualify. Someone who is just a lover of money. Addictions are, whatever you're in love with, that takes all of your attention and focus on all of that. But he says in the last days, he's talking about the chaos of finances in the last days, and part of it is because people are addicted and lovers of money. Again, he says don't love it, but that's not an easy thing to do, right? We deal with money all the time. Every day we have to deal with money. We pay bills, we go to the bank, we give, we count, we put money in the bank, we save, we do all kinds. Every day we're confronted with some aspect of what are we doing with our money. So it's pretty easy to kind of fall in love with it. Secondly, he says in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17, we are not to trust it. Command those that are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who gives to us richly all things to enjoy. Don't trust in uncertain riches. That is, they have a way of taking wings and flying away. If that's where your trust and that's where your hope is, you're on dangerous ground because they're so uncertain. I mean, the stock market, anything, we're living in a day of uncertainty. We're seeing prices rise and our money being depleted in different kinds of ways. And there's a certain fear there, but he's saying, don't trust in money. Now, again, we're reminded in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, where he says, no one can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, or else he'll be loyal to the one, despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. You can't serve God in money or God in possessions. That's idolatry when you do that. And then he reminds us that we're not to regard money as our own. We already read it in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17, where he says, command those that are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who gives us richly all things to enjoy. And then James 1:17, every good gift and every perfect gift cometh down from the Father above, from the Father of lights, in whom there is no variableness, neither shadow of changing or turning. Everything we have comes from him. So it's important that we understand that we're not to regard money as our own. And that's our tendency, is this is mine, and what I give to God is just, you ought to be happy with that, whatever that happens to be, and have no other expectation upon us. Now, how do we spend it? How can we spend our money? Well, 1 Timothy again, 5:8 tells us we're to take care of our family. It said, if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. We have a responsibility to care for those who are in our care, our children and our loved ones and those that are near to us. We have a responsibility to help take care of them. And we ought to do that. That's one of the things that God gives us money to do with. Then we're to work for that money. He says in Ephesians 4:28, notice what he says, the reason. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands, what is good, that he may have something to give to him who has need. One of the reasons we earn money and make money is to have the provision to be able to give to others in need. Now, which would you rather be, the person who is in need or the person who has the ability to give to someone in need? But oftentimes, we don't really look at the other person in need. We consider this our own, and you're going to have to give me a really good reason why I should even bother to help you. It may be our neighbor, whoever it might be, or someone, a brother in Christ or whatever. Now, the wonderful thing is, again, I think people here respond to people in need. But I'm just saying, that's one of the ways that we spend our money, or one of the ways that God has ordained, is that we earn money so that we have it to be able to help others with that. Then we are to save, prepare for emergencies. Again, doesn't kind of a hard line to know, but he's not telling us we should hoard in any way. In Ecclesiastes 5:13, it says, "There is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner to his hurt." You know, we hoard money and it really becomes a disadvantage for us in the sense that it hurts us. We're worried about it, we think about it, it rules our lives and all those kinds of things. And he's just saying, don't hoard. I mean, save, prepare, that you can care for your family. But how much is too much? Well, that's between you and God. I'm not going to tell you how much to keep. I'm not going to say you need to keep a 6-month store or whatever. That's between you and God. My dad loved the farm. And one of the things that he liked about the farm is that he could provide for his family. Dad had gone through the Depression or experienced the Depression and knew about that. And, and those people who did were very conservative oftentimes with their monies. And my dad liked to have some cows around. He liked to have some beef. He liked to have some pigs. He liked to have chickens. He liked to raise a big garden. And we every year we had really 3 or 4 gardens all across the property. And we would, my mom would can all kinds of things, beets, corn, all beans, all the things that you would do. And he had a rich store of food in the cellar. And he had animals on the hoof. And he had eggs there. And he said, as boys, he said, I may never be rich enough to give you any money to really buy the things that you want. He said, I will be able to feed you. I will be able to feed you. He didn't care what happened to the economy. He knew he had enough right there around him that he could feed his family. And so that was important to him. But Proverbs 30 talks about the ant and how they prepare, how they are wise. They are a small creature, but they're wise in that they prepare in the summer for winter. So it's okay to prepare and to save, but we struggle between that balance of trusting God and investing with God. I want to say something about an issue that often gets mentioned is the tithe. And I could preach a whole message on the tithe, and I know that because I listened to whole messages on the tithe. I'm just going to summarize for you a little bit as a reminder of what this thing called the tithe is about. We have to ask the question, where did that even come from? Where did we learn to teach New Testament believers to tithe? Well, we get it from the Old Testament. It's an Old Testament concept. In fact, it is never mentioned one time in the New Testament as a reference to what a believer is to give. It's never mentioned in the New Testament saying, you, as a believer, have to tithe. The Old Testament even makes a distinction between the tithe and free will offerings. And if you want to look some of this up, I'm not going to turn to these, but I'll give you some references. There is a thing in the Old Testament called the Levitical tithe. That was 10% the people were to give to support the priestly tribe of the Israelites, of the Levites, the priestly tribe of the Levites. Israel was a theocracy. And really the people who ran the nation were the priests. And they had a job taking care of the worship aspect of the nation, the sacrifices and all those things that they had to perform and do. And so the nation then was to take care of that priestly tribe by giving 10%. Then there is called and that's from Leviticus 27, Numbers chapter 18, if you want to look at that. A national festival tithe, Deuteronomy chapter 12. This was a tithe that was done in which the people would bring all of their foods and stuffs to be eaten in Jerusalem. It was kind of a national potluck dinner. And they would come and they would bring all this together and they would share. It stimulated devotion to the Lord. It brought unity to the people. and there was 10% that was to be exercised there. They also had a poor tithe every 3 years, 10%, which amounted to 3 1/3% each year. But every third year, there was a poor tithe that they were to give so that they could take care of the poor within the nation. All three of these were actually forms of taxation. We do that today, don't we? Most people are taxed 25% to run the government. In fact, Joseph did that when he administered when he had 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. He told him to take 20% and set it aside for the future and all of that. We hear that from him. Actually, it wasn't 10%; it was actually 20%, a fifth there. But they had all of these things to take care of, and all these programs so that the country would run, the government could run. And besides that, on top of that, if you were to cultivate or harvest your field, you had to leave the corners unharvested so that the poor could go there. If you spilled grain in a field, you weren't to pick it up so that the poor could get that. They had that as a way as well. And then on top of that, every 7 years, and then on the year of Jubilee, they were to forgive all their debts of those who owed them money who were part of the nation of Israel. If you were a Hebrew part of the nation of Israel, every 7th year or whatever, you had to forgive the debts of those around you. So they had a number of things that they were required to do. Now, as I see it, the only value of percentage giving is that it allows me to see how giving as God sees giving. For example, suppose someone comes into $5 million and they elect to give the church 10%, $500,000. This actually happened in the church I pastored. People sold land, got $5 million, gave $500,000 to the church. That was a blessing. That was a wonderful blessing. They could have kept it. They could have done whatever they wanted to with it. But they gave 10% of that and gave it to the church. We were in a building program. It came at a really good time for us. But so, say there's another person who receives $5,000. And he comes along and he puts in $500. He's given the same amount, 10% of the person who gave $500,000. Because he gave according to what he had. Now, actually, if that person with $5,000 decided, I'm really going to just I want to give God a token of my love, I'm going to give him $1,000. That's 20%. He's actually giving more than the person who gave $500,000. Because they gave 10%, he gave 20%. You see what I'm saying? That's how I think God looks at giving, according to what you have, not what you don't have. And I want to show you an example of this. In Luke chapter 21, I want to look here for a moment at a passage of Scripture that's always intrigued me about giving. Jesus is in the temple. And when people gave in the temple, they had kind of a metal trumpet kind of receptacle that when people put their money in, it made a lot of noise. People could see how much they were giving. You know, we like our giving to be private, don't we? As a side note, I preached one time in an all-black church. Never been in an all-black church before. Me and my buddy was the only two white boys there. But they were having a youth thing, and the pastor knew me and asked me to come and speak. And so we came and we spoke, and I spoke, and they had him up front, and they had the pastor emeritus was up here, and Pastor emeritus got up and commented on my message afterwards and had a word to say about my message. And then he said, now we're going to take our offering up. This offering plate is for the preacher. This offering plate is for the church. And everybody got up and walked around and put their money in as they observed what people were putting in. Everybody put money in, and then when they got this side got done, this side got up, and they all marched around and put their money in as the pastor and the emeritus was observing. I thought, wow, I've never seen that done before. That's interesting. Actually, that was at that time I got my greatest offering. They gave me a sack of change, $25 in it, and that was the biggest offering I'd gotten at that point in time as a beginning preacher. It was all in coin, it was all in change, and they just gave me the sack and thanked me for coming. I thought, this is interesting. Well, here we read Jesus is in the temple. You think Jesus doesn't care about what people give? Notice how he's paying attention. Luke 21, and he looked up and he saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. He watched them. They were putting their gifts in, making a lot of noise, no doubt, the rich particularly, because they wanted people to know how much they were giving. And Jesus doesn't say anything. He's just watching. And he saw also a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites. And he said, truly I say to you that this poor woman has put in more than all. For all these out of their abundance have put in offerings for God, but she out of her poverty put in all the livelihood that she had. Jesus watches these rich people give. He doesn't praise them, he just observes them. And then this certain poor widow comes, drops in 2 mites, which would have been a very small amount. And Jesus says, stop the program. I got something I want you to understand. I want you to see. You see this poor widow woman? She put in 2 mites. She has outgiven every one of you because she gave out of her poverty. You gave out of your abundance. You think you gave a lot? This woman gave everything she had and put herself totally dependent upon the Lord to supply her needs. Now, to me, that says that could only happen by percentage. No way did she give more in amount than that person who gave the rich gave, but by percentage, she gave 100%. She gave everything. They were just giving some of, and God said, Jesus said, she has given more than you all. The Lord takes note. But here's the problem with the tithe. First of all, it's not biblical. At least it's not New Testament biblical. And it's often given for the wrong reasons. Oftentimes people give out of a sense of obligation. I got to give 10% or God's not going to be happy with me. Rather than a response from a loving, willing heart. I want to give this because of my love for the Lord. Now, there's nothing wrong with giving 10% if that's what the Lord puts on your heart, but it's not a standard that everybody has to live by. Nothing, and the second thing that's wrong with that aspect is that it hinders what you could do by making you think you're done. I gave my 10%, I don't have to give anymore. No, that's not what God says. 10% may be all you can give, maybe the right amount between you and God. But it may be that God wants you to do more. Shouldn't grace cause us to want to do more than what they might have done under the law? This is not a legal issue for us. When we realize everything that God has done for us, shouldn't that promote and motivate a desire to give back and to do, whether it be money or time or service or whatever it is, that we would give back to God? But the reality is you can be a consumer of God's grace or you can be a steward or administrator of God's grace. And here's the secret of grace giving. The secret of grace giving is this. You get to choose the measure of grace you receive. Let me give you an example. Matthew chapter 6. We're going to give you a few examples here. Matthew 6:14. Part of the ending of the Lord's Prayer, he says, for if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive you your trespasses. Wow. You know, we pay a big price to withhold forgiveness. Truth of the matter is, I need God's forgiveness every day. Now, he's not talking here about our salvation. It doesn't mean that we're lost if we don't forgive. It's talking about our relationship. It's talking about our fellowship, our communion with God. And what I learned from this verse is that if I withhold forgiveness from you, I cut my own throat. Because that directly impacts how God relates to me. My horizontal relationship impacts my vertical relationship. Do you see that? If I want to know the peace and joy of forgiveness, I need to be forgiving. Because that's how grace works. Okay, let's look at another passage along this same line. Matthew chapter 7, verse 1 and 2. Judge not, that you be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with what measure you use, it will be measured back to you again. Luke chapter 6, verse 37. Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it'll be measured back to you again. That's pretty clear, isn't it? For us, as to how God works in our lives and bringing blessing and direction and encouragement to us. With the same measure you use, it will be measured back to you. We read that twice, first in Matthew and then in Luke. If you want forgiveness, you want mercy, you want understanding, you want love, how much do you want? You want a spoonful? You want a shovelful? You want a wheelbarrow load full? You want a dump load truck full? How are you treating others? The point is, the principle of grace is you get to choose. You want a lot, you give a lot. If you don't, be stingy, with your attitudes and with your love and all those kinds of things. How much treasure you want to lay up in heaven? That's why I believe grace giving needs no hooks, no manipulation with fear, guilt, duty. I've heard it plenty of times in my life, and you've heard it plenty of times in your life, where preachers will get up and will twist your arm in every different way to get you to give an extra cent. I have tried not to do that in my ministry, and I've become more and more convinced of it as I've grown older. And so now we're coming to our text. That's all introduction, okay? We're in our text. And that's part of the problem. I'm going to be preaching on this again next week, because I realized I couldn't preach everything I wanted to preach today on this subject of grace giving. But I want to give you an Old Testament illustration. In Exodus 25, verses 1 through 8, we read, Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, that they bring me an offering. From everyone who gives it willingly with his heart, you shall take my offering. And this is the offering which you shall take from them: gold, silver, bronze, blue, purple, scarlet, thread, fine linen, goat's hair, ram's skin dyed red, badger skins, acacia wood, oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil, for the sweet incense, onyx stones, stones to be set in the ephod of the breastplate, and let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell with them. Now, notice what he says in verse 2. Everyone who gives it willingly with his heart. This would have been a great time to say, hey, the standard for all time is 10%. Everybody bring their 10% to the church, and let's get it in here. I demand this offering. But instead, he says, everyone who gives it willingly with his heart. Don't you like that? Don't you like when God speaks to us in love and in compassion? Just tell them, give whatever they want. I want an offering from a willing heart. No big poster saying, have you given your 10th today? Remember, this is in addition to the tithe tax that they were already been giving. So this is extra, okay? Now let's see what happened. You come to chapter 35, And you read what happened here in verse 5. Take from among you an offering of the Lord. Whoever is of a willing heart, let him bring it as an offering to the Lord, gold, silver, bronze, and again, he lights all that stuff. Then we read in verse 20, and the congregation of the children of Israel departed from the presence of Moses, and everyone came whose heart was stirred, and everyone whose spirit was willing, and they brought the Lord's offering for the work of the tabernacle of meeting, for all its service, and for the holy garments. They came, both men, women, as many as had a willing heart, brought earrings and nose rings and rings and necklaces and all jewelry of gold. That is, every man who made an offering of gold to the Lord. Do you see this outpouring? I mean, he says, just bring it. And man, they just unloaded. They started bringing it all in. They were excited. They just had this idea that man, we have an opportunity to build a tabernacle, and the Lord has promised to dwell with us. And if you read with me in those few verses, 3 times in those verses, he says, I want them to do it of a willing heart. Not some legal or arbitrary amount. So, what happened? Chapter 36 of Exodus, verse 5. The craftsman that came to Moses and said, the people bring too much more than enough for the service of the work which the Lord commanded us to do. So Moses gave a commandment, and they caused it to be proclaimed throughout the camp, saying, let neither man nor woman do any more work for the offering of the sanctuary, and the people were restrained from bringing. It says the people brought much more than enough. So much that Moses had to get up and say, stop giving. Stop bringing things to this. We've got all we need. We really can't handle any more right now. We got too much. When was the last time you heard a preacher get up and say, please, people, stop giving because we just got too much? I haven't heard that. I don't think I've ever said it. I don't think I've ever told anybody, don't bring, we got more than we need. No, there have been times when we had a project that we could say, hey, the need has been met. You can stop bringing for this project. It's done. We got enough. But here, Moses gets up. In other words, the idea is when people believe in the ministry, when they believe that what you're doing glorifies God, they're always going to give more than enough. You don't have to exact a certain amount. You just tell people, give from the heart. And if they have a heart for God, that's what's going to happen. So here's a clear illustration that giving with the right motivation, that willing, loving heart will go beyond the need. And the principle for us is found in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 17, where he says, every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. God has blessed some people more than others. I mean, I know people I got a nephew that's a millionaire. God hasn't blessed me that way. I've never gotten to that goal of being a millionaire. I haven't even got half that much. I just haven't got it. He's blessed him, and I am thrilled for him. But the point is, as God has prospered you, God has blessed us all in different ways. But we can all still participate. We can all still give. I thought about this, and another illustration came to my mind. When Dave Schaefer prepares for an event back there, and he begins to cook a meal. I remember last Thanksgiving, and he was in here, and I expected maybe we might get 30 or 40 people to come for that meal. It was a Thanksgiving meal. I said, Dave, how many are you preparing for? He said, 100. I said, what? Wait a minute. I said, we're not going to have 100. We might have 30, 40 people. He said, yeah, but I want to make sure everybody's got plenty. And he said, if they don't have enough, or he said, if we have leftover, he said, I got places I can take it to. I got places I can take this food to, any extra that I have. I went, whoa, that's fun. That's exciting. That's why you never really have to worry when he's involved that are we going to run out. He always cooks for more than expected. he has more than enough. That's really what God's saying. If we are in love with him and we care about what's going on as far as the ministry is concerned and as far as what's happening here, people are going to give. And I've seen it. I've seen people just automatically say, hey, I'll take care of that. Doesn't even have to come out of the boat. I'll just take care of that. What a blessing. That's, I'm sure, over and above and what they might normally do. And I never want to limit myself to 10%. I guess in my own mind, 10% is the least I want to do. I have other places that I give to missions and other kinds of things that are my expressions of my love for God. They go beyond the 10%. And that's okay as long as God gives me the ability. I don't even, I'm at a point where I go into a restaurant and if a waitress is waiting on me, I know that technically we're supposed to give, 20% tip? I really want to surprise them every time. I want to give them a 30 or 40% tip. Maybe at Christmas time, I may give them a 100% tip. Because I know they're working hard. And I know they don't get appreciated. And my attitude is if I can't tip them right, I don't need to go out and eat. Eat at home or tip them right when you go. Because I want to express my concern for them. It also gives me better service. They see me coming, particularly if I go to Cracker Barrel a lot. It's the place now where they bring me a sample of beans and my unsweet tea before I even ask. They see me and they just bring it to the table. Because they know I may ask for beans if the beans are good. And so they always bring me a sample. I don't have to say, would you bring me a sample? No, they see me, I sit down, they bring it. Part of that, I think, is because I'm trying to treat them right. And in turn, they just treat me so nice. There's certain waitresses that I go to for that. Certain sections I want to sit in because I know I'll get served by them. And they see me and we have a good connection, okay? Now, I didn't do that necessarily to get them to do it. I did it because I wanted them to know I appreciate it. But as a result of that, that's how they showed their appreciation to me. I thought, wow, that's so cool. And the question is, how's God bless you? Give from that your expression of your love for him. Israel believed God needed a tabernacle. He requested a tabernacle. They were going to give it because this is all his anyhow. Notice it happened again when King David wanted to prepare the material for the temple that Solomon would build. In 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 9, the people rejoiced. Now here, David has said, I want to prepare for the temple, building of the temple. He could not do it, but he could lay things in store for Solomon, his son, who would later build it. And so he challenged the people, and the people rejoiced, for they had offered willingly because there was a loyal heart that they had offered willingly to the Lord. And King David rejoiced greatly. Then in verse 16 we read, O Lord our God, all this abundance we have prepared to build you a house for your holy name is from your hand, and it's all your own. They said, really, we didn't do anything special. We didn't come up with this on our own. You gave us this money. Now we're just giving it back because it's yours, and we want this temple to be built. Next week, we're going to talk about an illustration of grace giving from the New Testament. We have one from the Old. We're going to look at one from the New. What I do know is that I can't outgive God. I do not regret any gift or any sacrifice that I've made. I do regret not being wiser and investing more in the kingdom. I know that I've squandered a lot of what was his on selfish endeavors. It wasn't on other people. It was on me or whatever. Again, I don't think God minds, for us to enjoy the things that he gives us, and we ought to, take advantage of that and enjoy life. It's just don't make it your God. Don't make it your idol. And recognize that even though he gives these things for us to enjoy, it's still his, and we're stewards of it. And we ought to be careful in how we give. But the question really this morning for you is, when you give, is it from a willing heart? Is it from a wise heart? It says, man, oh man, there's nothing I can do more than invest in God's kingdom. Just invest in the thing. And investing in people is a part of that. You see a person have a need and you just reach down and say, hey, I've got the ability to meet that need. When the love of God says, I want to help you, and you reach out and meet that need. You know, that can come in all kinds of different forms. Not always right here in the church. It's outside the church, and how we use God's money as stewards to meet the needs of others. It may be missions. It may be any number of things. But opportunities abound for us. So don't limit yourself to 10%. If that's all that God would have you to do, that's between you and God. One of the things I've made it a practice in all of my years of ministry, I never knew what people gave. I never counted money. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to show partiality. Somebody who gives a lot, someone who gives less. I rejoice when I find out, and I praise and I encourage those who do that. But I don't need to know. Because if I did, I'd probably get mad at some rich people who didn't give very much, and I'd be real happy with the poor people who gave a lot. You know, my tendency would be to show favoritism toward those who were faithful in their stewardship. But that's not between me and you. That's between you and God. You're the one that's going to stand before God one day and give an account. How did you steward my money? Did you invest it wisely? Did you invest it in the kingdom? Or did you frivolously waste it away? I think the motivation for giving is to have a willing and loving heart. Because God is always interested more in the heart than he is in the amount. Again, doesn't mean you shouldn't give. Just means how you give is going to be an expression of your love. So how much do you want to come back to you? Shovelful, spoonful, dump truck load full? What do your grace says you get to choose. Isn't that interesting? Father, thank you for the opportunity to love you and to serve you. Thank you for this time to be together. And Father, thank you for the rich, rich blessings that you give us monetarily, financially, physically, emotionally, spiritually, family and friends and loved ones. You are so rich toward us. And you demonstrated that in the richness of your love in sending your Son to die in our place. Father, when I realize everything I have is yours, it's not an issue of how much should I hold back. The issue becomes how much can I give back to you and still meet my needs, still meet my obligations, still meet the people who I care about and projects and ministries that I care about that are eternal in nature. How much of that can I give back to you? Because, again, I'm an administrator. I'm a steward of grace. So, Father, I pray that you would speak to our hearts. Help us to give from our heart. And we know, Father, in that process, the needs of this ministry will be met. You will provide. While we believe this is an important ministry to support, we believe that the testimony of this church, of this community, is vital. We pray that the gospel might continue for years to come to go forth. But it'll have to be supported. It'll have to be by those who believe in what we're doing. I pray that you would bless. Thank you again for the opportunity to be a part, to just be involved in a program that brings such eternal rich dividends for us. When we just give spontaneously and give generously for the cause of Christ. What a joy it is to love you and to serve you and to just know and experience their blessings. And again, to know that you judge us not on the basis of what others do, but on what we do, with what we have, with how you have prospered us. It may be different. It may look different. Father, you're seeing the faithfulness behind it, and you're seeing the love behind it. And you have promised to reward that. Thank you again for this time. Thank you for these, your people. Thank you for those who have given over the years to support this ministry and who continue to give to support this ministry. Thank you for their faithfulness. Thank you for their love. But Father, may we just grow in our love for you every day. For it's in your name we ask it all.